Well, hello and welcome back to day 3 of Weight Loss Your Way on Life Coach University's 365 Talks. My name is Norma Frahn and I'm a life coach for weight loss. And today's talk is going to be all about emotional eating. Now, this is a big subject. But before we dive in, I want to remind you that our only cost of admission is simply your promise to pay it forward with some act of kindness. So if you have questions or comments as I'm going through my talk, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box. Just hover around the bottom of your screen and the little Q&A button will pop up. Just click that and go ahead and type your questions or comments in. And then at the end, I'll be sure to go through, get them all answered for you. So let's get started. All right, my first question for you is, do you identify as an emotional eater? And I actually hope you do, because I believe that we're all emotional eaters. Food is such an important part of our culture and our society. You know, we celebrate with food, we grieve with food. Most of our social events involve food, and our holidays and religious observances are all centered around food. Food is emotional. We express love with food. And I don't see any of this type of eating as a problem. Where emotional eating can become a problem, though, for us is when we're using food as the primary coping mechanism for our lives. And when we do this, we're usually trying to avoid feeling something painful or maybe frustrating, or you're angry, or trying to create something different, a different kind of feeling like comfort or safety or just calmness. Now, I'll say this, it shows up differently for all of us because, again, we're all unique individuals with unique backgrounds and experiences. So, for the purposes of introducing emotional eating today, I'm going to be speaking in more kind of common general terms, but I invite you to see how what I'm saying might apply to your unique situation. So, I couldn't possibly hit on everything because, again, we're all unique. But I think how I'm going to present this today, you'll be able to kind of like pick it up and lay it over your situation and find ways to employ these strategies and kind of unwinding your own emotional eating. So let's talk a little bit to start about where this behavior of eating to soothe our emotions came from. And I think we can trace most of our eating behaviors back to our childhood. And beginning as a very young child, most of us probably inadvertently learned that negative emotions are bad and we should do whatever we can to push them aside. When we express sadness as a child, we were probably encouraged to smile and told things like, oh, don't cry, it's not that bad. And if we did cry because we hurt ourselves or had a bad day at school, the adults in our lives doing the very best they could possibly do to soothe us because they didn't want to see us sad may have offered up a cookie or an ice cream. Now, by no means am I implying that our parents intended to create emotional eaters out of us. They were just lovingly doing what they could to make us feel better. It's the only thing they knew to do. And that was to distract you from the pain. And sometimes it was with food. So the seeds were unintentionally planted pretty early on for most of us. And then, usually in our teens, especially girls, we're introduced to dieting in some way, usually through society and magazines and friends and the whole thing. And we started to view our body as something that wasn't acceptable, unless it was a certain shape or size. And when we felt bad about our body or bad about a failed diet attempt, what did we do? We went back to what we had learned. We self-soothed with food, the very thing that we learned early on that would make us feel better. And it just started a vicious cycle. So the point is, at some time in our lives, using food as an emotional coping mechanism was a learned behavior. So that's actually really good news because that means it can be unlearned. And the first step to unlearning this type of emotional eating is getting keenly aware of how it's showing up for you in your life, when it's happening, and what triggers it. And a lot of it, you may not even realize it's happening. It's just become so automatic that you don't even notice it unless you're paying attention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you do that, how you find these things and these circumstances or thoughts or people that are triggering this type of emotional eating. So, hands down, the most frequent form of emotional eating that I did and still do sometimes because I'm human is what I call relief eating. It often shows up for me in the late afternoon when I'm tired or stressed. I used to call it my witching hour. And the weird thing about it is that I rarely am actually hungry, but it feels so urgent that I eat. And then because I know I'm not hungry, my brain tries to convince me of all the reasons it's a good idea to have something to eat anyway. I'll hear things in my head like, you need a pick me up, or you'll be able to concentrate once you have something to eat. Or you had a light lunch, go ahead, have a little something. Eventually, I wear myself down and I eat. Then I feel all the guilt and shame about eating. So I go and do some more eating. Sound familiar? I'm sure many of you have experienced a typical pattern like this. And this played out for me for years until I got really curious. And I started to learn that my eating in circumstances like this or in search of relief from my stressful day was just a habit. But I really had to understand what was going on and really get to the bottom of why I so desperately needed to eat every afternoon. So I kind of started to pay attention. I dug in, and what I came to realize was that I wasn't hungry for food at all. I was hungry for a break, some relief from a mentally and emotionally taxing job, and from the pressures of managing a family and a career. I just needed to rest, to shut it all out. And I learned that food gave me that relief, even if it was just momentarily, because my nervous system so badly needed just to be calm. And before I knew it, a habit was born. So I had to figure out how to unlearn that emotional eating habit. And you can do this too. First, you've got to pay attention to your current eating habits. This was the one that I noticed was most dominant for me. There were many others, but this is the one I started with. Notice if you have those patterns, like my afternoon relief eating. Maybe yours comes in the evening when you're finally sitting down in front of the TV, or it could be a person or a relationship in your life that sends you straight to the Oreos. Finding those triggers or those habitual times when you're eating for some reason other than actual hunger is going to give you an opportunity to be very intentional about how you respond to the urge to emotionally eat. Awareness is a powerful thing. Once I became aware of why I so desperately wanted to eat every afternoon, I could actually do something about it. I suddenly had options. And once my only option was to eat. So now I could actually plan for how I was going to handle it. And this is where all the experimenting comes in. Just like I talked about in normalizing food and experimenting eating things that scare you maybe or you might be considering bad, or experimenting with just understanding that this is just a habit and we can dig in and start working on the real problem. So putting your brain to work on the root cause of the problem instead of just focusing on white knuckling through the urge is how you're going to break the habit of eating in response to an emotion. All right, so let's go back to my afternoon relief eating so I can tell you what I mean by all of that. So when I paid attention, I recognized that my desire to eat was because I was tired and I needed a break. So I went to work on solving that. I tried planning my day a little bit differently so that my afternoons were less stressful. I started taking more frequent breaks throughout the day. I just find a few minutes and get up and walk around. And then I played around with my diet and I added more vegetables and protein to my lunch just to give me a bit more energy at the end of the day. And then over time, I found the combination of things that started to reduce the stress a little bit. And with a lot of practice and a lot of willingness to be a little bit uncomfortable, I eventually stopped getting that overwhelming urge to eat every afternoon because I'd solved the root problem. So, the other thing I did too, when I mentioned before about now you can plan for this urge, in the early days of figuring this out, I just kind of decided, okay, I know I'm going to want to eat in the afternoon. I know I'm not going to solve my stress in one day. So I would plan and bring some food with me that I knew would serve me well. It would be good for me, it'd be good for my body, and it would satisfy that urge to eat. So that was just another tactic that I employed because now I knew where this was going to show up and I could get ahead of it and just kind of level up the things that I was eating instead of running to the vending machines like I used to. So, the other thing I want you to be aware of is the difference between resistance and allowing a little discomfort. This was super unclear to me when I first started, so I'm going to do my best to try to explain this so you don't have to spend a lot of time working through this. But oftentimes, our first instinct to solve our emotional eating is to just white knuckle our way through it. Whatever that emotion is, just white knuckle our way through not eating. But the problem with that is when you take the food away and you're just hanging on for dear life and trying to let that emotion pass, all you're left with is the emotion. All the feelings that you're trying to avoid by eating are now open and exposed like a wound. And it will feel like it's completely amplified because probably all you can think about is how awful it is and how unfair it is and why this shouldn't be happening to you. That's resistance. That's pushing against the emotion and letting your brain run wild with all the reasons why this is so terrible and sucks. But allowing the discomfort to just be there and not feeding it with all that negative energy, even though it feels like that's like instinctively the thing you should do, if you can stop doing that, it will make the process of breaking this habit so much easier. Because when you get right down to it, it's a feeling that you're trying to fight because you don't like it or it scares you and you want to escape it. But what I'm suggesting is that you just allow it to be there. Don't push against it. A feeling truly can't hurt you. It's just a vibration in your body. What makes it feel so hard is when you try to push it aside or try to force it to go away. But instead, maybe try to acknowledge it, name it, and notice the physical sensation it creates in your body. So let's go back to my relief eating again. When I felt the stress, it would feel anxious. Like I would get kind of tight in my chest. I'd notice my shoulders were up in my ears. My pulse would race. My knees would be going up and down. And I'd start to feel kind of clammy and sweaty. What I now say to myself when I feel this coming on is, up, there it is. That's just stress building up. Thanks a lot for the warning. I'll go take a little break now. And that just kind of neutralizes the energy. And I know it sounds a little silly explaining it to you like that, but I literally acknowledge my stress like this every time it comes up. It makes me feel more in control, and it always passes more quickly when I'm not fighting with it. So, allowing discomfort of an emotion is a skill, and you will develop it only with lots and lots of practice. And here's what it kind of looks like. So, like I was just saying, you notice the urge is coming. Take a breath and remind yourself it's just an urge and it will pass. Notice how discomfort feels in your body. Just like me, is your chest tightening, is your jaw clenched, or your shoulders up in your ears? Take a deep breath and try to relax. Acknowledge that it's uncomfortable right now and tell yourself this is what my urge feels like in my body. It's just a vibration and it'll pass. And you know what? Urges literally pass in about 90 seconds. So, do you see the difference between resisting and allowing? When you resist, you're pushing against it, and that amplifies it. When you allow the discomfort, it quiets down, kind of like letting the air out of a balloon. When you're resisting, you're putting more and more air into the balloon until it eventually can't hold anymore and it pops. When you allow the discomfort to just be there, the balloon starts to relax and slowly starts to deflate on its own. So I hope that made sense. So remember, this is a skill that will only develop with practice. Don't let your diet brain take over and tell you this isn't working after one or two attempts. You've got to keep at it, especially with emotional eating. Because, like I said, this is probably a behavior that we learned as a child. So we've got an entire lifetime of, of practices and habits that we've built up around self-soothing with food. And you know what? Sometimes you will succumb to resistance, but it will be less and less often the more you practice. And over time, what's really amazing is that you will retrain your brain to learn a new habit. And the frequency and intensity of your urge to eat in an emotional situation will decrease, and the discomfort passes so much more quickly. All right, I know I've said a lot. I hope this made sense to you. So let's do a little bit of a recap just to get the key points out of this. First of all, to understand and know where to start your work, because we want to get to the root problem. It's never about the food. Notice when you're trying to manage an emotion with food and ask yourself, what am I really hungry for? And then allow the urge to just be there without trying to resist it with all that negative energy and pushing it away. And then practice it over and over and over again. It's going to take some time, just like we talked about with normalizing food. This type of practice, you're not going to master it in a week or a day, a month, or frankly, I don't think I've ever mastered it. And I've been at this for 4 years, but I'm really good now at recognizing when I'm about to eat for some other reason other than hunger and figuring out what that emotion is and what's under it, because that's the thing we need to solve. All right. And then the last thing I'd offer is to really acknowledge yourself as you celebrate every time you practice this skill. When you celebrate your wins, your brain starts to make new connections and it recognizes your new behaviors as a good thing. And our brains love repetition. So the more you practice, the more it recognizes this is good, this is what we're doing now, the more likely and faster it's going to jump to that new behavior as its first response instead of that old behavior of sending you to the vending machines or the refrigerator or whatever it is. You're going to have much more control over how you control your response to emotions. And believe me, that when that happens and these things start to get easier because you're now in control, the emotions and the food no longer are driving the car. You've got it. All right. I hope you enjoyed this talk today and you found some useful strategies to apply in your life. And remember, change comes from taking action, even messy action. And this is messy work, my friends. The messier, the better. This is how you get to the real issues behind emotional eating, is finding what you're hungry for. And it's rarely ever food. All right. So if you really found something in here that resonated and you want to explore this concept of emotional eating more deeply, I invite you to a free Done with Diets call with me. And we'll take an hour. We'll explore your unique emotional eating situations and come up with a strategy to get you started on unwinding it for good. So all you need to do to have that call with me, just go to normafrahncoaching.com and click the big orange Done with Diet buttons in the upper right corner. So I thank you for being here again today. And don't forget, be sure to pay it forward with some act of kindness. All right, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Oh, shoot, I am so sorry. I completely skipped over questions. Let's see if we've got any. All right, let me move my screen. I really wasn't anxious to leave you all. Okay. All right, so let's see. There's always lots of questions around emotional eating. And then also, questions are going to come to you after the fact, after you've had some time to think about this and digest it a little bit. But yeah, here's one of the questions, this just seems so hard. How do I just jump in and do it? Well, I'm not going to tell you it'll be easy. It is a little bit hard in the beginning, but it does get better. Like I said, it all goes back to being aware. First thing you need to do, is pay attention. Just pay attention to the times when you catch yourself overeating, when you catch yourself, 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 wanting to eat or eating because of something you're feeling. And then spend some time figuring out what that feeling is and why you're trying to cover it up with food or push it down with food. Just getting aware is a huge step forward. And then once you have that awareness, you can start putting some strategies in place. Let's see, another question I get is, you know what, I feel like it's just out of control. Once I start, I can't stop. How do I stop eating once I start? All right, well, this is a tricky one, but the good news here is to remember you always do stop. It might not be as soon as you'd like, but you do stop. And again, it comes down to awareness. I know for me, I would find myself kind of eating my way through the kitchen during my little witching hour when I was so stressed out. The more I practiced this, though, I would catch myself while I was eating and say, "Oh, wait a minute, what are you doing?" And then I'd just kind of stop and think for a minute, what do I need that's not food? Maybe I need to go sit down. Maybe I need to go take a walk. And sometimes that would work and I would stop, and other times it didn't. It's all about honoring what's going on with you in that moment. But awareness, first and foremost, is a win. Even if you keep eating and you decide that you know what the situation is, but you're gonna eat. That's okay. Don't beat yourself up about that because you've made progress. Even if you ate, you made progress because you identified why you felt the need to eat, and now you know that that symptom is there and you can go to work on that the next time. I hope that made sense. This can be a really tricky subject for a lot of people. And like I said, I strongly encourage anybody to book that call with me, and I'd be happy to work through your unique situation. All right, I think that takes care of the questions for now. And I'm so sorry I almost breezed right on past that. And we'll see you tomorrow. So have a great day, everybody.